Hi, I'm Cheryl Sloboda from So Much Cosplay, and today we're going to be talking about corsetry, or corsets. There's many different kinds of corsets, and they vary from overbust corsets to underbust corsets. There's corsets in all sorts of dressmaking and strapless dresses, and even in making lingerie. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making corsets for cosplay. And I've been making a bunch of different corsets for a steampunk cosplay that I've been building over time. And so that's what I'm going to be doing today. The corset that I'm making, and I'm following just a standard pattern for the corset, has lots of different pieces. And I don't want you to be intimidated by making these, because once you lay all the pieces out and you start to see how they're constructed, it will make a lot of sense. And what I'm going to be doing is I've laid out all my pieces, I've sewn them all together, I've pressed open my seams. Now all of my fabric before I cut it and sewed it had a fusible interlining put onto it. And you can see that I'm using this suede material. It's a cloth. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create the casings for the boning that goes into my corset. Now, in this particular pattern, it creates what we call a self-casing. So by creating the seams here on either side of each seam, you're going to create a spot for the boning to slide into. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to the machine, and we're going to sew those down. I know that the edge of my foot is my 3/8 inch seam. And so I've already measured that here. So I know that when I'm using this particular foot, I'm going to get a 3/8 seam. What I want is that 3/8 seam on either side of my initial sewn seam. So that is what I'm using as the guide against the edge of my presser foot. So we're just going to go ahead and get started by sewing. And I don't want to sew over my pins, so I'm just going to take those out as I go. And just, take your time. We're not in a rush. Now you'll see that this is about the straightest of all of the seams in this corset. But there are some challenging seams. There's definitely some curves that go over the bust. And so what you want to do is just make sure that you clip those seams really well so that they lay flat when they go under your needle. Now that you can see that I've got that one side sewn down. What I can do here is go ahead and do the other seam, but what I want to show you is how to do the boning, okay? So, and then if you flip it over, you'll be able to see that it's created that nice seam on the front. All right, so let's get over and show you how to put the boning in. What you're going to do when you do your boning is it comes in the package and it's usually rolled up really tight. And what that has happened with this particular kind of boning is it creates a little bit of a memory, so it wants to go back to its original shape. What I do to keep that from happening is I take a iron and I press with the casing, with the fabric casing on the boning, I press the boning so that it gets a little bit warm. I flip it over, press it again. Sometimes I may need to hold the iron onto the casing a little bit longer, and then I just let it rest. I can hold my fingers down on it to keep it nice and flat until it completely cools, and then the boning is much straighter. If you were to take the boning here and just insert it into your project, you're going to get all of this curving, and it really just becomes more difficult to work with the garment if you leave the casing, or if you leave the boning in its sort of coiled up shape. So there's different kinds of boning on the market. There's steel boning and other types of plastic boning that do sometimes need to have caps on the ends once you determine the length that you need in order to go through the project. So what I would do is I would take the boning, lay it out, and measure exactly how much boning you need, and then you're going to take your snips and you're going to cut it. Now, for this particular project, because we've created a casing, we don't need to leave the fabric casing on the boning, but what we do want to show you, if you do have to leave your boning in its casing for the project that you're working on, you will just stitch down on either side of the boning casing, and I usually take the boning out before I do that. But we're not using the fabric casing in this particular case, but we do need to prepare the end of the plastic boning. And what I need to do for that is to take a pair of heavy-duty scissors or snips and just trim off the edges. And I don't want to create a very sharp point. I want it to be nice and rounded, because when I insert this into my project, first of all, I don't want to poke a hole in my corset or in my fabric, but I also don't want it to eventually poke me as I'm wearing it. So it's really important to make sure that you leave that edge rounded. Right, and so then when you are inserting this and you have, you make sure that you have the length that you need, right? Then you'll be able to do all of the different casings that are in this corset. Now remember, this one actually will have 2 seams on either side, so technically this is double boning for each seam, which is a lot of boning. Also, don't forget that if you're doing a different type of boning, you're going to need to put the caps on before you put them into your project. Now, for this particular corset, I don't need to stitch the ends of my casings closed because the pattern calls for you to put a lining in. And so you'll create the lining in the exact same way using the pattern pieces, and you'll lay them out in the same way. And you'll then put right sides together and stitch all the way around the edge of your corset. And that's going to close each and every one of your boning casings, so you don't have to worry about that. So I already have that done, and you'll be able to see that here. So you can see that having the boning in the project makes it a little more unusual to work with when you're sewing it down. I've also added on all of my trim, and that additionally keeps all of the boning pieces in place where they need to be. So we've created this nice lining, and now it's time to talk about the grommets, right? Because many of the corsets are usually laced, and they can either be laced in the front or in the back. This particular pattern that I've chosen is laced in the back. And so what I've done is I've taken my pattern piece and I have marked out where all of the placements for all of the grommets need to go. So once I have that marked on here, and I have them also, I just take my scissors and make a little tiny cut, and you're going to need to make sure that you cut through both the top fabric and the lining, because when you want your corset, or sorry, your grommet to go in, you want your grommet to make sure to go all the way through both the top fabric and the lining. So we're going to make some space here, bring over our grommet tools. You're going to want to protect your surface. Obviously, you're going to be making some noise. And the grommet has two pieces. It has a male end and a female end. Now, the male end is technically the top, and so this is what will be on the top surface of the fabric. So when you push your grommet through your fabric, you want to make sure that you get it through both sides both the top fabric and the lining. You're just gonna wanna make sure it gets through there. Now I'm gonna flip all of this over because your grommet tool has a little bitty divot in it. And that divot is where this fits. And you'll actually feel it sit directly into that grommet, that little place it's made for. And then you're going to want to put the female end on top. Now, this may have a right side and a wrong side, so you're just going to double check to make sure that you're putting the right side up. And once you have that in place, then you're going to have the tool that you use to drive the pieces together. And remember that male end is going to curl over and hold down the backing to the grommet. So you're going to get your hammer and you're going to make a little noise. You're just going to want to make sure that you keep your hands out of the way. Now I'm just double checking to make sure that the end is all the way down. And so then you can see that you have a really nice placement. Now there are tools to actually set the grommets that is more like a plier shape. And so just quickly to show you how that works, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to put your grommet in there. Now this hole doesn't seem to be as big as the last one. There we go. And again, I'm going to set my female end in, and then you just take the pliers and you take those and squeeze them, and that's how you get them to set for that one. So once you finish all of the grommets down one side, and of course you're going to need to do that all the way down the other side, then you're ready to do all your laces. And I use just a standard ribbon. You know, you can match the fabric, you can do something contrasting, and that's when I have my finished piece. So you can see that we have all of those double bones in this particular pattern, and it creates a nice shape. The particular boning that we've picked is going to be nice and comfortable, so it's going to be great to wear all day at the convention. And if you just check out the back, you'll be able to see all of the great grommets, and creates a really nice detail from the back. You're going to need to make sure you have someone help you get into this particular one because you're going to need some help. But all the grommets come in lots of different colors, so you'll be able to match it to any outfit. And so I hope that that has demystified the corset for you, and hopefully we'll see you in a corset in your next cosplay.